You know, the question is, why would I switch to diving on empty lungs? My story is one of, it's a kind of a strange situation, I guess. Well, it's a really simple thing. It's not rocket science. It makes inherently no logical sense unless you start doing it and you notice the benefits. So human divers are inherently lazy. We'll try to find the path of least resistance. You know, the aim is to use up as less energy as possible, and mine was purely accidental. I just got tired of having to fight or defy buoyancy. If you can imagine, if you fill up your lungs, then obviously you're going to be quite positively buoyant, or most humans are. Actually, a friend of mine said, I saw a documentary the other day on whales, and they were exhaling. So I thought, well, that's interesting, isn't it? And so I scoured the scientific landscape and found lots of articles of various animals, from diving birds to sea snakes to reptiles like crocodiles, iguanas, and of course seals were doing it as well, and some whales. So this was like a universal strategy for resolving or overcoming a common problem. You know, the aim is to use up as less energy as possible, and the aim is to use up as less energy as possible. And how could it be that exhaling and, say, losing maybe 50 to 75% of your lung oxygen store, sacrificing that much oxygen, how can you possibly dive potentially for as long as on full lungs? So if you dive on empty lungs, for example, on a passive exhale, then we know that the dive response is magnified. You probably have less oxygen, so we should probably kick this response in sooner and to a greater extent, and that's what happens. I could sit on the bottom of the pool for 2 minutes on empty lungs, and then at 2 minutes, where I had the urge to breathe, go off for a swim for 2 minutes. You know, I could never have achieved that when I was doing on full lungs. And that's like a 4-minute dive on empty lungs. You know, the idea of collapsing your lungs, it doesn't sound very good, but if you understand the physiology behind what happens when your lungs collapse, and that the alveoli, which is the terminal air sacs in your lungs, where most of the gas exchange occurs, are essentially quite compliant and can actually collapse completely. This happens regularly during cardiopulmonary bypass, for example. They collapse your lungs, but it's not like they collapse and stick together and you'll never be able to reopen these alveoli. There's enough surfactant coating the inside of the lungs to allow this to overcome the surface tension to be able to pop open those alveoli. So, you know, for me, it's not a big deal. I don't think about it as like my lungs are collapsed. I could also think my heart slows down to 10 beats a minute. Oh my God. But is that necessarily a bad thing? No, it's just a compensating mechanism. So, yeah, I don't see that as a big deal. But certainly you have to be progressive about your approach to depth, because this stuff will crush you and spit you out pretty quickly, irrespective of how fit and tough you think you are. Yeah, you've got to give it time, and most people are in such a hurry. They have no time, purely because one is they're used to diving on full lungs and able to reach depths of 50, 70, maybe 100 meters. And so the idea of sacrificing all those lungs and experiencing a potential of a lung squeeze, you know, means taken a huge step or backward perspective on the whole thing, and spending maybe a few years developing this ability. Most people don't have that level of patience, because they're competitive. Yeah, they're still trying to maintain or not lose what they achieved on full lungs. So the proposition of asking someone to spend the next couple of years perhaps to develop or adapt to this level of pressure is not an attractive proposition. So most people don't have that level of patience to commit to an idea. I don't see myself as very competitive, so I've got all the time in the world. Yeah, I found that I was just diving not only more efficiently, but with much more lucidity, especially towards the end of a dive, where typically you're low on oxygen, and the risk or potential for things like shallow water blackout increase. And so I didn't have these problems. Not only did I not have these problems of hypoxia, I didn't have the problem of nitrogen narcosis. During deep dives, if you dive deep enough, you will experience nitrogen narcosis, whether scuba diving or free diving. Obviously it happens at a greater depth, but I didn't experience that problem anymore. And presumably the problem of decompression on us also went off, disappeared, dissolved as well. So yeah, and I found my dive response when I measured things like heart rate was much stronger. It makes inherently no logical sense unless you start doing it and you notice the benefits.